world were weak and shriveled, small and diminished compared to animals in the old world. And this idea spread very, very quickly around Europe. Now, it's a good example of how misinformation spreads and why it spreads. Buffon was genuinely convinced that the bits and pieces of data that he had showed this, that life really was smaller and weaker in the New World. But the people who picked up on what Buffon did, they had their own agendas. And their own agendas tended to focus on things like how to make sure people in Europe, particularly people with money, don't go over and live in this new world because we need their money here.
Biased information transmission.
That's right. We want anything that we can get our hands on that we can tell people suggests don't go over there. And
so this is a little like the people in Portland, Oregon, I understand, constantly telling people in California, it rains too much here, you wouldn't like it here.
Yeah, what happened with Buffon's people was they picked up on this. They picked up on this big time, and they made the argument that not only should you not go over to this new world with your money, but we can trot out for you the world's most famous scientist, and arguably one of the most well-known names in Europe at the time, Buffon, who will show you as a scientist that this is a dangerous thing to do. And so people began following up on this, writing follow-up books to Buffon's books that were all sort of generated by this economic and philosophical view of the world, that it was completely divorced from any science. So Buffon himself really thought this, but everybody else, in terms of what's weak and diminished, but everybody else who followed up picked up on it because this is what they wanted to hear, and this is what they needed to hear.
So this is an example of an idea that was attractive to certain groups and spread by certain groups in their own interests, which is what our newspapers are still doing.
That's right, and so one could make the argument that this is exactly the sort of thing that's happening these days with climate change. You've got people who, for primarily economic and potentially even religious views, don't want to view the world as one in which we're essentially destroying the planet because it doesn't work economically and it doesn't work in their view of the way the world should work. And so they are resistant to anything that would show them that they're wrong. And they put up a very strong fight. And this is what people do when they have positions that they've entrenched themselves in.
But that's a generalization. I mean, don't people always figure out what they believe and then defend it no matter what it is?
Well, one would like to hope that that's not what's going on in science, that what we're doing is essentially trying to avoid exactly what you're talking about. So, there's sort of a classic way to think about the scientific perspective, and what we're trained to do is is to examine all sorts of possible explanations and go with wherever the data take us. And so, yes, it's possible that we may focus on certain things over others because we have a political or whatever axe to grind, even subconsciously. But once we address the question, one would hope that we're going to do it in an unbiased a way as possible.
But in the history of medical research, and especially public health epidemiological research, there's example after example. Try to bring up what's the effect of salt on health. And you're wandering in salt marshes intellectually before you know it. What a quagmire it is.
So I think there are certain areas that are going to be more prone to these kinds of problems, right? So if you're talking about something that is going to be fundamental to human health, and you're also talking about something that has sort of large-scale economic consequences, you're more likely to get people entrenched into a camp before they know it, even potentially unconsciously, than you are if you're talking about some potentially important thing like E. coli being altruistic to each other that most people aren't going to care about. So so I think